So for those who don't know me, my name is Michael Dietrich. I work at the Minnesota Department of Education. I'm a policy specialist there, working with some of our federal title programs and school and district accountability. I'm also the Meet and Confer Chair for MAPE at MDE, and a past treasurer for Local 1002, which covers MDE and Minute at MDE. I joined the Restructure project late January, early February of 2024, and so was part of some of the initial rollout of that, and then have moved into a chair role for that as our previous co-chairs both got hired on to staff with MAPE. So currently I'm the member leader chairing that, but we do have representation from many other folks in the union. So we at the Restructure Project have been working to develop multiple ideas that we'll be talking about today for how we might rearrange part of how MAPE is itself structured to try to make sure that we are best advancing our strategic goals as a union to represent our members. As part of that, we're also thinking about what are the formal elected roles in the union and how do they work together with each other to, again, advance our priorities for our members. So it wouldn't be a conversation with the state employee without there being a PowerPoint involved. And so with that, we'll jump in here. I'll note there is a lot here. I'll do my best to keep an eye on the chat, but my general take here is going to be to kind of move on through the slides here. I'm going to be gesturing off to this end because this is where I've got the screen where I'm sharing the slides. I'll pause every so often for folks to enter questions into the chat, but we'll probably do a batch answering of questions when we get to the end, just so we have a chance to make sure that we get through all of what we've got here because it is fairly dense. So with that, welcome. Please do make liberal use of the chat. Looking forward to seeing what folks have for questions and thoughts as we move along. So why we're doing this is going to be the thing that we start off with first. So just why restructure matters, especially with everything else that is going on. We'll talk a little bit about why this project is still underway and why it is potentially going to be important for us in the future. We'll spend some time with the theory of action that we've been working with as a restructure team, talk a bit about where we're at in the overall timeline and the process that we're looking at for exploring this. We'll spend the bulk of our time on the different ideas we've put together to kind of stress test different concepts and get some feedback, generate some questions, generate some thoughts from folks, and then talk a bit about our next steps moving forward from here. So why are we doing this? Why is this a thing that we are spending time on as a union? So one thing to note is that this is happening in the context where we are already in the middle of some really big fights. So right now we are navigating the return to office pieces for many folks that are bringing a lot of folks into the office more. We are also in the middle of an intense contract fight. We know that the proposals we're seeing around healthcare are grim. We know that even as we're waiting for the final resolution on the budget at the state legislature, we're pretty sure that whatever that final version is going to keep things feeling very tight when it comes to what we might expect in terms of across the boards this year. And we know that these are not the last times we're going to be having fights like these. So we know we're going to have future fights that are going to require us as a union to be able to muster similar or higher levels of effective mobilization to what it's going to take to win the current set of fights that we're in. So we know that part of why the budget is looking tighter now is because looking even further down the road to 2027, the budget outlook right now is even grimmer. And so we know that if we want to tackle anything around workload, for example, which we know is a commonly heard concern, the key to that does run through the legislature in a lot of places. And so that 27 legislative session is going to be important for what are we seeing for our agency budgets for our ability to address workload. We know that it's going to also set the framework for whatever that 27 bargaining cycle looks like. And again, if things are feeling rough now, it's unlikely they're going to be feeling much better in 27. So in terms of us being geared up to navigate these, those are some known fights that we know that we have coming up that are going to be tough to navigate. We have been in this period where we're unsure what else is happening at the federal level and how that might impact us. We've seen some of the initial effects of that in places like the Department of Health, where we've had to navigate some layoffs as a result of federal funds being stopped. I know that at my agency and in many other agencies, we're still waiting to see what all is going to come down, but we know that we're feeling some of the branches creak. We don't know what all is going to come next there. We also don't know what else might come from this governor or from future governors in terms of exercising what they see as their managerial rights in ways that make things harder for our members. So being able to be positioned to respond effectively to that, to mobilize people effectively in response to whatever that might be, is something that we want to be thinking about. How well positioned are we to do that? And then also there are just things that we can't anticipate that are still going to come up and present challenges for us that we want to be thinking about how are we ready for at a structural level. As we do that, we are aware of some of the challenges with our current structure. And here thinking primarily about how heavily our current structure relies on which particular office or worksite people are assigned to. So right now we've been in the position for the last while here where we've kind of frozen existing members in whatever local or region that they were in. Even as offices have been shut down, people have had their official work sites moved and concentrated in various places as the state has ended leases and things like that. We know that we are in this middle of this return to office fight. We are working to win strong telework protections right now at the bargaining table. If we do win those, we will likely continue to see cases of members who live fairly far from their assigned offices. We know we already have some of that going on. We've got a member of the Restructure team, for example, who's been assigned to a downtown St. Paul worksite for DHS, but who lives in Fergus Falls. And so for her navigating being involved with her ostensible local, with being able to do in-person things with whoever is may represented in her neck of the woods where she physically is, that's been a challenge. And we know that she is not the only one like that. I know that at education, for example, we have a growing number of folks who live pretty far from the metro in ways that we think are pretty healthy for the state. So if we are able to win those strong telework protections, we would expect to see some of this continue in the places where it makes sense. And we would want those folks who live further away from their assigned work sites to be able to participate meaningfully in whatever way they want to with the union in ways that we're finding challenging right now. Additionally, if it takes more than one contract cycle to win strong telework protections, we would expect to see that the state might start trying to acquire new real estate, new offices to have us in, because we know that they don't have enough space right now for certain agencies. And so that means opening new offices and potentially reassigning folks again and having folks kind of keep moving around where they're officially assigned by the employer. And so in general here, what we're recognizing are some of the challenges that come from having our structure as a union be this dependent on particular choices made by the employer that are increasingly less stable than they were a decade or more ago. So as we're navigating this kind of new world, that's a thing for us to be thinking about. So that's why we're still engaging with this, because none of that is going to change going forward. Like we're going to be in that place where that sense of disconnect is going to be happening in various ways, regardless of how this particular cycle plays out. We're going to have some challenges continuing there. So as a group, we have put together a draft theory of action. You'll note here, I really like the use of the word draft. So I am a former teacher. In particular, I liked teaching writing the best. And part of the ethos that we try to bring to this work is thinking about how we want to keep everything a draft for as long as possible. So right now we are still in a drafting phase for many parts of this. And so we're looking for feedback. We're looking for the ability to revise and edit going forward. And so just wanted to note that kind of philosophically. So with that, here is our current theory of action draft for the way that we think about this. So 1, a union organizes and mobilizes workers' collective power. 2, that power is in the costs and benefits we're able to bring to management. That's true for pretty much all unions, if they're working with worker power or other organizations that are organizing workers. But, however we're doing it, that power of the workers is in what costs and benefits we can bring to management. When we are talking about mobilizing workers, workers are going to mobilize, they're going to express that power for the people that they care about and for the issues that they care about. As we think about what we're using this power to do, so as we think about how we're using this collective power of the workers, we're thinking about how we use it to shape our contract specifically, as well as how we use it to shape our work more broadly. And we do think here a key thing for us to know is that MAPE in particular is uniquely positioned to unify our connections to communities around the state, the ability to engage with electoral power in multiple ways, and the ability to engage on sound public policy. So that's something that we are in a position to do that virtually no other union or organization in the state is positioned to do. So just to go into a little bit more detail here, when we talk about organizing and mobilizing workers' power, this is when we're using these words in very particular ways. Organizing is a word that often gets used very broadly. Here, we're thinking about it specifically in the context of building relationships and structures, whether that's between the workers that we represent or with other individuals and organizations to whom we as workers can connect. So organizing is that building process for building all of that, and then mobilizing is when we activate those relationships to do something. So to pick a particularly relevant example right now, a lot of regions and locals have contract action teams right now that they've built. Those vary in size, but the goal generally is to have a contract action team that has enough people on it that each person on that team has roughly 10 or so workers that they are in contact with as we're navigating bargaining. And ideally, those are 10 workers that they already have some existing relationship to, and if not, they're taking the time to build that relationship. That then means that when it's time for us to activate workers to show up to an informational picket, or to show up outside of bargaining, or to show up for an event somewhere in greater Minnesota where we're trying to get pictures or video to share to help demonstrate the geographical spread of mobilization that we're doing. Whenever we have that type of mobilization that we're looking to do, we then tap the cats to do that. Those contract action team members activate those relationships with the people that they're interacting with to get them to turn out in whatever form we're asking them to do. So that's organizing in contrast to mobilizing as we're thinking about this. So on that second point, thinking about workers' power and the costs and benefits to management, one of the things we're thinking about here is the distinction between private sector and public sector worker power. So in private sector organizing and private sector mobilizing, when we're thinking about how are we using worker power in the union context or otherwise, the primary thing we think about there is the economic costs and benefits that are being brought to the employer. So if we think about what a strike does in the private sector, it stops the work, and so it stops the ability of the employer to generate revenue, to generate profit. It makes it so they can't do what they're in business to do. And because they're in business for economics, it's the economic impact there that matters to them. For those of us that are in the public sector, like MAPE, like AFSCME, like teachers unions, like a lot of other public sector unions, for us, it isn't just strictly about the economics. It's not about how much profit is the state of Minnesota making that impacts the way that Tim Walz or MMB think about how they're interacting with the union. For us, instead, it's about political costs and benefits. Ultimately, our boss, our management, comes from elected officials, whether that's the governor or whether we're talking about key legislators that help determine things like what our agency budgets look like. If we think about who's at Minnesota Management and Budget, MMB, who we do a lot of our negotiating with, ultimately the commissioner for that is picked by the governor. They're going to respond to what the governor is saying. So the boss for us is a political boss. It's an elected official or a combination of elected officials. And for them, it's not about how much profit are we making, it's about the politics. So we have to be able to engage in being able to impose political costs and offer political benefits as we're navigating this. I do want to note here a really important point for us is that this is political, not partisan. So it's really important that we not see ourselves as an extension of or strictly connected to a particular political party. That actually ends up weakening our power if we can only operate when we're on good terms with one particular party. And we've seen with when we can be the first union to endorse a governor and still wind up in a situation where he's acting in ways that are really contrary to what many of our members want. So this is not about partisanship, but it is about recognizing that as public workers, we are implementing politically decided laws a lot of the time. We are in politics whether we want to be or not. So we need to be able to play in that space. As we're thinking about our political power here, one of the things that we're drawing from our current strategic plan as a union is that our power here comes from organized people, as well as organized ideas. We'll talk a little bit more about how that might look structurally in a little bit here. and organized resources. So those are different ways we have to demonstrate power. It's not just about being able to have people show up, although that is usually a big part of whatever we are able to do. Having people show up is one of the best things that we have available to us. Or at times having people not show up is a way for us to wield power. The key is that we're doing it in an organized way as we're mobilizing folks. So as we think about what that worker mobilization comes from, like what's going to get somebody to show up to a thing, or to not show up if we end up on strike at some point, or to sign a petition with their name attached to it in a way that management is going to see. If we think about like what it's going to take to do that, people will generally mobilize for the people that they care about and for the issues that they care about. And so people here could include both formal and informal union leaders. That's one of the things that we kind of the most control over as a union, is what are our formal leadership roles. But we also know we have a lot of informal leaders, people who have previously held positions but don't anymore, or people who aren't looking to hold a particular formal position but are still trusted by their colleagues. So those formal and informal union leaders are one set of people, so one set of folks that workers will mobilize for. But they'll also mobilize for their colleagues, regardless of whether the union's asking them to or not at times. Or it might not be because of the appeal from a particular union leader, but it's because I know that my colleague over here is being hurt by this thing that management is doing. I'm going to show up for them. So they'll show up for their colleagues, as well as at times we'll see people will show up for their neighbors. If we think about how people respond when there are crises in our communities, people will show up for their neighbors. What gets people engaged and activated in community work in general in their lives outside of work. Oftentimes it is that connection to neighbors or to friends who live in the same community that they do. So people is one source of motivation to mobilize, and then issues are the other big one. So workplace issues, return to office being a key one for folks, but also as we think about to pick a different example from our last bargaining cycle, the SERP benefits for folks in the correction system. That was a workplace issue that we were then able to elevate to the level of contract bargaining and help get across the finish line as a union. So we can all think of workplace issues that have helped mobilize people as they've encountered them. People also mobilize for community issues and issues in other aspects of their life. We are not all just about what we do at work or what our work is like. We all have other lives as well. And those issues in those places will also be a place where we will mobilize. So in terms of how we're using all of this power, it's again to shape our contract and our work. And so the more clearly visible we are as an organization at shaping our contract and our work to make state government work well, the more effectively we can mobilize people, especially people who are not necessarily in our union, to impose costs and offer benefits. One of the things that we know is that if we can mobilize our members, that's a critical first step. And there are going to be times when we can be additionally effective by having partners outside of our union who are showing up with us in solidarity with us. And then we can return that by showing up in solidarity with them. As we navigate all of that, there's a big question like, what are we doing this for? And to that, thinking about all of what we do is in the service of making the state government work well. Having a strong workforce, having a workforce that is not overworked, that is not burning out, that is not turning over constantly because the pay is bad or because the benefits are bad. Having a good, strong, stable workforce that is adequate to meeting the needs of the state. All of that helps makes the state government work well, and lots of people can get on board with that and will join us in fighting to make that happen. All right, and then I mentioned earlier, and we'll expand on this here, our particular position. So as we were taking a look at kind of what is MAPE's current strategic position, one of the characteristics that we have that is both a strength and at times a challenge is just the sheer diversity of where we are and what we do. So if we think about all of the different types of professional backgrounds that people have before they come to the state, all the different professional connections that they have before they come to the state, the connections that they build and maintain while they are at the state, we have members who are connected to sectors and industries all over the economy for Minnesota. And that's both challenging at times because it means that we don't always have all of the same things in common, but it's also really advantageous for us in terms of being able to build that strong set of connections in a lot of different places in the state. Similarly, geographically, we are all over the state. And that too is something where there are challenges for that sometimes in terms of maintaining cohesion and navigating all the logistics, but it also is a real strength to the union that we do have a presence all over the state and in bordering states. So those geographic connections are a source of strength for us, even as they are also sometimes a source of some challenge. Also, because of the work that we do, we have members who have good strategic visibility to what other individuals and groups are doing that are impacting management's decision-making. We can see who they respond to, which other organizations, which individuals. When they say jump, management asks how high. We can see who those folks are by where our members are positioned, and they can see how their individual commissioners respond, as well as how they see the governor's office respond in their particular slice of the work. And we also offer valuable policy expertise. If we're thinking about anybody who gets into government to want to do good things, we have seen time and again people who get in who are new, who run into really predictable barriers for those of us who understand where those barriers are in our particular areas of government. So to speak personally from the educational perspective, like I think about standardized testing requirements or the labyrinth that is school finance is a thing that takes people a lot of time to pick up. And we can be a source of expertise about how all of that works because we are the experts on it. And so we can help people get better at navigating all that effectively. So that's kind of where we're thinking about where we're at strategically. In terms of timeline for this particular process, right now we're in a feedback stage where we've put these ideas together, we're putting them out for feedback. This is building off of engagement that we did last spring, analysis and exploration that we did last summer through the fall and winter, where we took the engagement that we did with members and used that to then drive some exploration of how do other organizations tackle this, how do other unions tackle some of the things that were surfacing from our members, and then a chance to start drafting some proposals to bring some ideas to folks for this feedback that we're in right now. We're going to collect this feedback for the next couple of weeks here. We don't want to try to compete at all with the attention around kind of push week and the conclusion to bargaining. So we're going to spend some of that period working to revise proposals based on what we have heard in terms of feedback here. Once bargaining is done, between then and DA, we're looking to do a big educational push so that when we get to DA in September, we're bringing ask to DA to ask them to endorse one proposal and refer it to the full membership for a vote. And at that point, we're into the space of making it happen if it gets approved. So all of this goes through multiple checks to make sure that whatever we're doing has support broadly across the union. So that initial engagement, we had listening sessions with locals, with statewide committees, with staff, et cetera. We had a survey that was open to everybody. We do consider that engagement to be ongoing. If you want to have a more detailed conversation about restructure, please do reach out. We are happy to have that conversation. If you've got a group of folks that we should be talking to, we want to know so that we can talk to them. In terms of that survey that we ran last spring, we did have 320 total respondents. Most of them are rank and file members. Just under 50 were member leaders. We did have 30 non-members and 3 who had no identified role, but based on responses, we believe them to also be non-members in the mix. If we look at the responses just from those survey respondents and look at just the rank and file members, so these people who are already members of the union, roughly not quite 2/3 of them say yes when asked, do you see yourself reflected in our union? The rate of seeing yourself reflected is higher for member leaders, which is perhaps not super surprising. And it is lower for the non-members, which is also not super surprising. As we were looking at kind of more the open-ended responses we got from that survey, but also especially the notes that we took during all the listening sessions, we do see some key themes that emerge from that. So I'll do a kind of a high-level gloss on those here. I do want to note not all of them are directly about the structure of the union. We asked some pretty open-ended questions and people gave us wide-ranging answers in response. Some of the themes that we see here might seem to contradict each other. That's typically a case where there is variation across MAPE and how people were responding. And then one other thing to note here is that most of the respondents that we were hearing from have a partial understanding of MAPE's current structure, which is understandable. MAPE's current structure is something that, if like people interact with just pieces of it, and so don't necessarily have like a sense for the full scope of the thing, and that's okay. But it is just context for us to have as we're thinking about how we're interpreting what we hear. In terms of what we did hear from members that areas where we're currently strong as a union are in kind of just the core union functions, in providing support to members, and leadership development, especially around stewards. So steward training is something that's been identified as a particularly strong thing that we do to help with leadership development. Thinking about areas for growth, we heard about communication information flow, member engagement, and maintaining a good balance representationally for the union. In terms of recommendations, some of them were more structural, some of them were less structural. Some of the more structural changes people recommended. Some recommended reorganizing our locals to be based more on agency, others to be based more on the geography of where people live rather than where they're officially assigned to work. There was a recommendation to create dedicated committees for different member groups. Outside of the structural level, there was a desire for better data management systems, which we very much hear, and we're hoping that the Union Power Project will result in some changes there, as well as clearer emergency preparation protocols. In terms of that engagement piece and the communication piece, there's a desire for more personal outreach from member leaders to members or potential new members. There's a desire for mixed format meetings with better engagement techniques, desire for more service days and community building activities, better support for remote participation, as we do have this more remote set of folks. And then on the communication front, thinking about more proactive information sharing, clearer explanation of what our structure is, better advanced planning communication, and more targeted and personal communication. There was a set of recommendations around leadership development, especially I think outside of that steward space. So looking for clearer role expectations and time commitments for those formal leader roles, better support for emerging leaders, and then more flexible leadership opportunities. And we'll see some of this reflected in some of the ideas that we're exploring coming up here. In terms of member support, a desire for a better balance of meeting both experienced and new member needs, more focus on agency-specific issues, improved remote work advocacy, and enhanced strike preparation or education information. So that kind of takes us through the initial overview. Now we're going to get into some ideas for how we might navigate this. We have put forward 5 structure ideas for feedback. One of those 5 is to not change anything about our current structure. That was something we committed to do ahead of last year's DA. That remains a commitment, that one of the ideas that we have out here is just to not change anything about the current structure. The other 4 ideas that we're putting out do introduce and combine some possible new ways of structuring aspects of the union. As you're thinking about these ideas and these proposals, at this point, we're encouraging you to think of these more as like Lego pieces that we can replace and rearrange and shuffle around. We are not currently at the place where this is a multiple choice problem. So it's not that we could only pick one of these 5 options. It's more, hey, here are some different ideas. Let's see how well they fit together. And so as you're providing feedback, and there is a form that you can use to provide feedback, the more specific you can be about which components of particular ideas resonate with you and which ones put up the biggest red flags for you, that is much appreciated for us in terms of putting together a final proposal. We do have, like I said, a range of ideas we're putting out here, with the goal that some of these will provoke some strong feelings, either as a yes, I want to do that, or no, I absolutely don't want to do that. And we want to hear about both of those things from folks. So right now, the goal is not just to be at a nice, happy, harmonious place of consensus. The goal is to surface which of these things spark the most enthusiasm, which spark the greatest level of concern, and where do people just have more questions that we should be trying to answer. So I'll walk through these here also because I'm going to, by necessity, need to moving a little bit quickly. Each one does exist as its own separate presentation on the MAPE Restructure page. Cynthia will hopefully has already dropped the link to that into the chat, and we will kind of redrop that in at a future point here. So, starting off, current structure. What do we currently do? A key theme you're going to see running through all these ideas is the notion of layers, where right now we have two layers, and each of these ideas kind of maintains a two-layer approach because of just the different ways that people experience life and their connection to different parts of union work. So right now, the dominant layer for a lot of what we do is based on work site, and it's our regions and our locals that are based on where people's work sites are located. So we have our three regional officers in each region, the director, the steward director, and the negotiator. And then a region will have one or more locals, each of which will have 5 officer roles, president, vice president, treasurer, secretary, and membership secretary, as well as delegates who represent that local at delegate assembly. We also have this second layer, which is at the agency level. And this is where we have our meet and confer teams. And so, for example, if we think about a place, an agency like corrections or DNR, or direct care and treatment, or pollution control, or MnDOT, or many of the agencies that we're part of, they have locations all around the state, or at least in multiple parts of the state. And so those individual locations then are part of different locals and different regions. But that at that meet and confer level, we're able to collect agency level issues and engage with agency level management. But that is a layer that right now, outside of the meet and confer structure, doesn't have much else going on structurally. So our dominant layer really is that region and local piece. In addition to those elected roles, we also have appointed roles. So we've got meet and confer team members who are appointed. We've got volunteers for stewards, for contract action team members and leaders, and at some locals, we've got membership committees, which are led by the membership secretary. In terms of the total number of elected roles that we have within our current structure, it is roughly 288, depending on how many meet and confer chairs you'd expect to see. We know that not all those roles go filled all the time, but that is the number roughly that we have for formally elected roles. Financially, each local receives a designated dollar amount per member that drives what they're able to do for their local budget. At the state level, we have delegate assembly as kind of our highest level of governance. That is where changes to our constitution get made, to election rules. That's a DA. And then for other governance, we have our board of directors, which has the 21 different regional directors, as well as an executive committee that has 4 statewide officers, president, vice president, treasurer, and secretary. We've got 2 different statewide councils that are elected by the full membership, Organizing Council and Political Council. Each of them elects a chair who also serves on the executive committee. And then the meet and confer chairs elect a speaker who serves on the executive committee and on the board, but does not have a vote in those places. So that's our current structure. Moving on, we're going to talk about one of our ideas. Again, think about the different Lego pieces that are part of this idea and think about which of these resonate with you, which ones don't. This is a structure idea that focuses more heavily on the agency level. So it moves most of the core functions of the union to that agency space, but it does maintain cross-agency connection opportunities. That is one of the things that we heard during our engagement last year, is that there is a lot of interest in being able to maintain the ability to connect with folks from other agencies and not just people who are at my current agency. In this idea, we have a new concept of cohorts that I'll talk more about in just a little bit, but they're basically collections of agencies, as well as maybe some of the smaller agencies or boards that we can cluster together. There would still be a regional layer where we would maintain our current 21 regional numbers, but we would let members choose their own region based on, is that where their work site is? Is that where they live? Is that just where they have some existing connections that they like to lean into? But we would maintain that set of regional numbers and give some flexibility for how that all plays out in terms of what those regions end up looking like. So what is this cohort concept? A cohort would be a group of agencies. We would aim to have roughly 10 in this idea. So each cohort would have roughly 10% of the MAPE represented workers in it. One way to think about doing this would be to potentially cluster agencies together based on the type of work that they do. We'll have some examples coming up here on the next slide. Larger agencies would then operate their own teams within the cohort, and they would be in regular contact with other agency teams. Smaller agencies and boards would be clustered together and represented by a single kind of quote-unquote local team. And then stewards for a cohort would support any agency in that cohort, making sure that every agency then does have access to a pool of stewards. That happens right now at the regional level for us, where anybody at a work site in the region has access to the same pool of stewards working with that full region. This would maintain that so that if there is an agency or the stewards that are there are overworked or they don't want to engage with their HR on a particular issue, we would have other stewards available to help support folks navigating that. So I'm going to bounce back up here just to note again what the officer roles would look like. So at the cohort level, you'd have a director, a steward director, and a negotiator. This also experiments with moving the treasurer role to that cohort level rather than having it exist at each agency or local. So having a kind of a regional treasurer, except in this place, we would call it a cohort treasurer. This would then leave at the agency level a president, a meet and confer chair, a secretary, and a membership secretary who would be focused on membership activities for that particular agency. This too is something we heard about is how do we make sure that we've got good consistency in showing up to new employee orientations, for example, or thinking about regions or locals that we have where there are, a dozen or more agencies represented in that region or local. And so that membership secretary is meeting with folks and helping them navigate lots of different HRs as they're coming on board and navigating all of that. So moving some of those functions to that agency level there. So seeing the question from Rika, can you explain why there is a cohort level that is different than the region level? Yeah, so this is getting at for agencies that are more spread out right now, they are spread across many different locals and regions. And so for some of these functions, if we're thinking about steward functions, and for example, if we wanted to say, aggregate what stewards are doing at one agency to identify what is a workplace issue that we could do some organizing and mobilizing around. Right now, for me at MDE, it's simple enough. I go and I talk to the Region 10 Region Steward Director and I say, hey, what are we hearing from the stewards that are working with MDE? Because all of MDE is in Region 10. But if I'm the meet and confer chair for corrections, or for Minute, or for Minnesota State, or for many other agencies, I have to go and talk to a lot of different regional steward directors to try to identify what are some of the patterns that we're seeing. And those regional steward directors would then have to be like talking to a lot of different meet and confer chairs. So it's one of the current challenges we're into with our current structure. So this says, okay, we're going to cluster agencies together so that some of those things can be tracked at the agency level rather than based on the local level. Is that helpful for explaining kind of what we're doing there?
Kind of. Actually, I had a question about the reverse. Like, I think the cohort level makes a ton of sense to me, and I'm a little bit confused at what the region level, how that would play over, because the cohort level kind of mirrors the existing agency structure, but I'm not understanding how the region would overlap. Yeah.
Great question. Yep. So at the regional level here we'd be focusing more on kind of some of the social engagement opportunities that are less about particular workplace issues or recruitment or things like that. So this is where we'd have a director and a treasurer, but here you'll notice we are focusing on an engagement chair as kind of a new role that's focused on how are we engaging members in social activities. So as we think about, for example, to like take someone who's assigned to a metro office, but lives, let's say, in Fergus Falls, they might say, you know what, okay, I can connect on workplace issues through my agency, but I'm going to pick my region to be the one that is based where I live, not where my agency is located. And so I'm going to pick that region and that way I can know about and participate in any in-person things that are happening kind of around where I live.
That makes perfect sense. Thank you so much.
Yep, absolutely. Cool. So here are a couple examples of what this might end up looking like. Again, everything here is very much a draft. But as a starting point, you could imagine maybe MnDOT, Public Safety, and Housing Finance would all be discrete agencies within a cohort. Then you might have a smaller agency local that includes the folks who are at the Department of Military Affairs, Peace Officers Board, and the Public Facilities Authority. Those are all smaller agencies that have kind of smaller numbers of people that are represented in them. It's easy for those folks to get lost in in many of the other ways we could think about organizing this. So making sure that they have a dedicated space for themselves is something that we would be trying to do here. Another example would be one that doesn't have that small agency local, but takes some of these agencies that have like very clear alignment of what they're doing, the DNR, PCA, and water and soil, and says, okay, here's another cohort to consider. There are lots of different ways these could be constructed, but that's kind of the overarching idea. So in addition to those elected roles, we would still have appointed roles. So we'd have meet and confer team members would still be appointed. For those agencies that are larger and that have those different multiple sites, we'd still want to have the ability to do site-based level work in those places. And so for that, we'd say that, okay, the agency president can appoint site leads for those different sites. So again, corrections might choose to appoint site leads for each of the different corrections facilities in the state. Stewards, as mentioned, would operate at the cohort level. They would still be volunteers. CAT and LCAT we'd have done at the agency level. Membership committee would make sense to do at the agency level. Not every agency would necessarily need a membership committee, but again, the ones that are larger might want to do that. And the ones that are more spread out might want to make sure that in addition to a site lead, they've got a membership committee representative at each site that the agency is at. And then that regional engagement committee would be operating at that regional level to, again, help organizing things that are going to be meaningful for folks to do regionally. This would be having roughly similar number of elected roles to what we have right now. And then financially, here proposing that both cohorts and regions would each receive a designated dollar amount per member. At the state level, we would still have DA. We would expand the board of directors by having the 10 cohort directors and the various regional directors all on the board. We'd expand the executive committee. Here, an idea is to have 4 directors selected by the board also serve on the executive committee along with the 4 officers and then these various chairs, the 2 council chairs and then a statewide meet and confer chair. That's one where we would just make a couple tweaks to the speaker role right now. So the statewide meet and confer chair, instead of being elected by the meet and confer chairs from amongst the meet and confer chairs, would instead be elected by the full membership of MAPE to lead the meet and confer chairs committee. This is learning from the experience of trying to have someone who is simultaneously trying to lead a meet and confer team and also lead all the meet and confer chairs. That's a very big ask to make of somebody. As a prereq, we want to make sure this person has at least 2 years of service as an agency level meet and confer chair so they know what the job looks like, but they'd be prohibited from serving as an agency level meet and confer chair while being the statewide chair. And then in this model, they would be a voting member of the executive committee and of the board. So this is meant to address easier aggregation of what stewards are seeing in agencies with many work sites, as I mentioned, easier alignment of the member welcoming work that happens at the agency level, and then maintaining that regional level with that dedicated engagement role and member choice to allow for experimentation and variation in what sorts of both in-person and online member engagement can look like separate from workplace issue work. So that's one idea. Second idea, or rather a third idea, but the second one that isn't the current structure, is thinking about political power. So this is thinking about focusing on if agency budgets matter for workload, if the overall statewide budget matters for what we can expect for across the boards of the contract, if the ability to push back effectively on a governor or a legislature that is taking steps that we see as being really disruptive to our members for no good purpose, being able to engage in that level politically is something that we might want to do. So this is focused on building adaptable political power that recognizes that who the governor is going to change, who key legislators are is going to change. And so we want to be thinking about how do we navigate that. So this model would have regions and agency work. At the agency level, we keep it just to the meet and confer team like we do right now. And our primary structure would be a region, but instead of being based on work site, it would be based on where people live. And so we still have locals within those regions, but it would be based on where people live. And so one way to do this would be to take state senate districts, group them together. Again, for these purposes, we're saying, let's say we have 10 regions. So each one is going to contain roughly 10% of all MAPE represented workers. We would be able to redraw those as the Senate districts get redrawn to help make sure that we have good balance continuously and how big the various regions are relative to each other. By default, somebody would be in the region where their home address is located, but they could choose a different region if they would like to as their primary region. So maybe they know that they're living somewhere temporarily and are going to end up going somewhere else. Maybe they are experiencing a period of housing insecurity, and so they want to be connected to the place where they would like to end up long term. Or they might have other reasons why they might want to choose something else as their primary region. Additionally, people would be able to be an affiliate member of one or more regions other than their primary region. So that way they could stay in the loop on what else is going to be happening in that region. So for example, right now I live in Minneapolis, but my parents are in Rochester. And so it's possible that, a few years down the road, I would go and I would spend several months or longer down in Rochester to help provide care for my parents. If I'm doing that, I want to be able to maintain a connection to my Minneapolis based region where I would intend to return, but I'd also want to be able to connect with whatever is happening in Rochester to be connected to that. So that might be one case. Or maybe, again, to take someone who's experiencing housing instability, I want to be an affiliate member of lots of different regions where I might end up so that, again, I can build and maintain relationships with folks and kind of have some optionality there. Or to pick a different scenario, maybe I live in, let's say, St. Peter, but my partner and I have a cabin up north. We go up there every weekend in the summer. My partner likes to fish. I don't. My partner spends all the weekends out on the lake. Great, good for them. But I would rather, maybe do some door knocking or something like that. Having a chance to be connected to, as an affiliate, to a region where I'm going to be spending some time is a way for me to help stay in the loop for that and act on things like that. So that would be part of the goal there. This model would have quite a number of different regional level officers and then the ability to create locals as makes sense for each region. Probably, and some places would be organized around different regional hubs for greater Minnesota regions. For those in the metro, it might be organized around particular towns, or if we get into like Minneapolis and St. Paul, it might be as specific as like particular neighborhoods or Senate districts or some other way of thinking about things. So we have some flexibility for how those locals get defined. But the primary officers would exist mostly at that regional level. So here we'd have a director, we'd have a treasurer who would support all of the locals with treasurer's work, we'd have a secretary, we'd have a membership chair, civic engagement chair, solidarity chair, and policy chair, about all of which more in just a second, and then a negotiator and a steward director. At the local level, we just have a president, a vice president, and then the delegates. So what would these new chairs be? So the membership chair would lead the membership committee to support member recruitment or welcoming and member engagement activities in the region. If we think about a regional focus, that might include more door knocking or putting together in-person events to try to convene folks who are new to the state government to connect with each other and learn more about what it is to be in Maine. The civic engagement chair would focus on supporting workers in engaging in municipal issues or otherwise being involved in the electoral process, maybe running trainings and here's how to do the caucuses for whichever party it is that you are looking to engage in the caucus process for, since we know that's a bit of a jump for folks to get over. So that's focused really on building member skills for engaging in kind of engaging as citizens with electoral work. We want to make sure here that we're doing clear, bright lines with what is political action committee work, distinct from this civic engagement work. That would be a thing we want to make sure we're doing. Another new chair that we're proposing here is a solidarity chair. This is someone whose role in the union is to think about how are we connecting with other unions and organizations in our region to build allies for when we do have to have political fights, and where we can show up for other folks to help them advance their issues as well. Because right now this isn't really a role for anybody in particular in the union, which means that it doesn't tend to get done with any particular reliability, but there's potentially a lot of power in having somebody with that role. Then I mentioned earlier, organized ideas as a key thing, and the role that the policy expertise that we as state government workers have in terms of a source to power for folks. That is a source of soft power is the knowledge that we have, the ability that we have to put together effective alternative policy ideas for how the state could be governed. And so the idea here is that each region would maintain a policy committee that then supports members in developing and sharing their policy ideas with each other, but also with elected officials or potential elected officials to try to help make sure we are shaping the state to move in a direction that works better for everybody. So I'll have meet and confer team members appointed, and then kind of customized local roles appointed as needed, appointed by those local presidents. The volunteer level, stewards would operate at a regional level here, LCAT and CAT would operate at a regional level here, and then those various different chairs at the regional level would then have their respective committees, membership, civic engagement, solidarity, and policy. possibly with local subcommittees, depending on what the region ends up looking like, and what that work looks like for that particular committee. So different way of thinking about how we would put people together. This is kind of our lightest touch, or our lightest weight model in terms of number of formally elected roles, because of how much of it is done at the regional level. One thing to note here is that here regions would receive a designated dollar amount per represented worker rather than per member, with the goal being that they can use that to work on recruiting new members, and recognizing that the cost to doing so might be more about how many represented workers do you have, not how many members do you currently have. In terms of statewide bodies, we would still have DA. The board here would be a bit smaller. So we'd have the executive committee and the 10 regional directors, and that would be it. And then we would, at the executive committee, this would be a little bit bigger. So we'd have the 4 statewide officers. We would then also have statewide versions of the civic engagement chairs, the solidarity chair, the policy chair, and the membership chair, who would each lead their respective councils, with civic engagement and solidarity chairs statewide co-chairing the political council. And then we would still have a meet and confer speaker working with the meet and confer chairs committee. And so each of these councils would be composed then of the regional officers for that particular function. So the membership council would have the 10 regional membership chairs in it, as well as the statewide membership chair leading it. So that means that every council then has guaranteed regional representation. So membership coordinates member welcoming activities, organizes political activities distinct from the PAC, policy coordinates that policy development and sharing, especially if we're thinking about there being regional policy teams. There's got to be some way to aggregate that up to the statewide level. That's what the policy council would do. All the council chairs would be elected by the full statewide membership, and then they would work with those various regional chairs. So this is really thinking about, at that meta level, the conditions that shape our contract, or like what the realm of the possible is for our contract, and for a lot of the other conditions of our work, is downstream of what happens with the governor and with the state legislature. So this is really organized around how do we most effectively engage at that level. By having the regions be based on where people live, we're tapping to not just where they are constituents, but also where they physically are, which allows for easier and larger in-person connections than we're able to do right now, with folks being kind of as spread out and cross-region as they are. It does have some more specific rules that are dedicated to particular activities that would have kind of the biggest bang for the buck in terms of having that political power. And it would have better cross-agency opportunities for a lot of folks than our current structure does. Because right now we have quite a few regions where, and especially quite a few locals, where there just aren't that many agencies in the region or in the local. There are others where there are a ton. But if we look at where people live, that is far more diverse in terms of which agencies people are in, for the most part, than many of our regions and locals are. It does have quite a few fewer elected roles than the current structure, which might then result in fewer long-term vacancies. So that's the political power one. Next one up is leadership development focus. This one maintains our current worksite-based regions and the agency meet and confer teams, but what it does is it changes a bit how the actual roles in the union work. So this has more regional roles with an expectation of there being regional teams that accompany that. So the regional level, you'd have a director, you'd have a membership chair, finance chair, organizing chair, political chair, as well as your negotiator and your steward director. At the local level, this would be a little bit lighter weight, president, vice president, and secretary, because you've got a membership chair that's operating for the full region, presumably with committee members in every relevant local to support the membership work in those locals, but all coordinated by a single membership chair. And then the delegates coming from the locals. Meet and confer team members still appointed, stewards still volunteers at the regional level, LCAT and CAT still volunteers at the regional or the local level. Then those regional committees with the potential for local subcommittees would be doing then some more of that work. So membership, finance, organizing, and political. This has a roughly comparable number of formal elected roles to what we have right now. This one would still do the finance to the region and local level based on the designated dollar amount per member. Statewide, we would still have DA. Board would still be 21 regional directors in the executive committee, but the composition of the executive committee would look different. It would be its own collection of chairs, each of whom would be leading councils composed of the regional chairs for that function for their region. So membership chair leading the membership council, which would have all 21 regional membership chairs on it. Employee rights chair leading the regional steward directors, finance chair leading the regional finance chairs, and so on. The idea here is to lean into that leadership development role and or function and say, okay, I can start off as a team member. It's a volunteer role, doesn't require me to run for anything, doesn't require any particular time commitment, allows me to get my feet wet really easily. And the goal here is to have a lot of different teams that I can potentially join based on what appeals to me and is interesting to me. As we knew that I'm building the skills for that particular function, and I'm watching what it looks like to be a chair. Then from there, I move to being a regional chair if I'm interested in doing so. And from there, I'm both leading my team in doing the work at our regional level, but I'm also observing what the statewide version looks like through participating in the council. And then from there, I might just decide to go for the statewide membership chair, at which point I will have definitely had good experience kind of building my way up. So that's the idea there. The finance council here would have all different regional finance chairs led by the statewide finance chair. And it would have at minimum 2 standing committees, a budget committee, kind of in place of the current finance work group of the board, and a development fund, which it would kind of be a permanent version of the Union Power Project. So the size of it would vary from year to year based on the year's budget, but the idea being that we would always have some pool of funds available to support innovative organizing and mobilizing in the union around issues that are attracting attention or around anything else that might help folks organize and mobilize. Another key shift for this one is making DA a longer process. Because right now, DA is something where if it's your first time going to DA, it is a huge jump to like figure out how to participate meaningfully in DA. So this would make DA a quarterly process, most of which would be online. The final one would be in person. That would look most like what DA currently is. But by starting earlier in the year, it allows you to convene the delegates, introduce them to what DA is, give them a chance to form committees, give them a chance to identify priorities for the year, to develop and refine resolutions that would then finally be voted on. But the goal here is to really make that DA process more supportive, especially for folks who are newer to it, and not just the folks who are already deep in the weeds on MAPE governance. This is meant to address leadership development needs and some of the other kind of structural things about how do we support good organizing and support folks in being effective in the union. All right, this last idea is kind of modeling some different ways you might combine some of these ideas. So this one I'll take kind of the fastest, because a lot of what it does is combine things we've already talked about into a different way of thinking about it. So this would take the cohort level from the agency-focused model and the home-based region layer from the political model, and would make those the 2 layers of the union. And rather than having one be a dominant layer, the idea here is that they would be roughly equivalent in terms of structural weight for the union overall. So again, I'll kind of breeze past some of the details here because we've covered most of them. There would be some minor tweaks to this relative to what we saw before. Again, all this is on the website. I'm just trying to honor time for folks. At the statewide level, then we'd have an executive committee. We would have the 10 cohort directors, the 10 regional directors would make up our board. DA would still have that kind of extended quarterly process. This experiments with trying to do all that, and then also having that kind of less hierarchical approach to the internal workings of the executive committee while making sure that each member is connected to their own council composed of regional chairs. And so this is trying to like take a bunch of different advantages of the different other ideas and show what it can look like to combine them in different ways. So that's kind of the high-level overview. Again, all of those materials are on the website for you to spend more time with, and you can always reach out to me if you'd like to get into more detail on any of them. We do have that feedback room available. It is set up so you can either do it all at once, or you can read an idea, provide feedback on that idea, read a different idea later, come back and provide feedback on that. We're holding these town halls this week, looking to present to existing statewide groups. We will attend any local meeting if you'd like us to come and talk about this. And again, we're using the feedback from this to help develop a final proposal after receiving that feedback to be shared after bargaining ends and then voted on at DA and then by the full membership if DA approves. So that is where we are at. I know that we are at time. So I will stop here. I will stick around if you'd like to have any additional conversation, but just thank you all very much for being here, especially at the end of a workday. I know this is a ton to try to take in all at once. So thank you for being here, for asking questions. Really appreciate it.